This is the beginning of our sex ed unit. This is actually called Lesson 0, and today we'll be covering the beginning of Lesson 0. The main topics that we'll cover are the group agreements for our course, the typical development of males and females during puberty, and some basic terminology. And I'll be stopping this screencast around slide 20. Throughout this unit, we'll be covering the typical male and female sexual development, goal setting and life planning, healthy relationships, choosing to delay sexual activity, family planning and contraception, and reducing sexual risk behaviors. So those are topics that will be covered throughout the entire unit, not just Lesson 0. In this lesson, some topics covered will be identifying why it might be difficult to talk about sex, identify guidelines for talking about sex, define sex-related and gender-related terms, identify male and female sexual health concerns, describe how to maintain sexual health. How will we know that you achieve that? Well, you'll be following the group agreements that will be covered in class, and I hope you will be committed to protect your own sexual health. Some questions to begin with. Why is it difficult to discuss sex-related topics? There's many answers to this question. For some, it's embarrassing. For some, they don't know a lot. For some people, they know a lot and they don't want to let on that they know a lot. Many, many different reasons. And the second question, how might some students behave when we talk about sex-related topics? Well, some students might be embarrassed. Some students might giggle. Some students might act kind of macho and act like they know it all. All of those are totally normal. And that because of that, that's why we set up our guidelines, our group agreements that we'll be covering in class. So the group agreements are behaviors that we will all be following to help promote mature and responsible discussions. There is actually a separate short slideshow and screencast that covers the group agreements. So let's move on. Do you know the facts about sexual behaviors of U.S. teens? Do you know the percentage of teens who have never had sex versus those who have? Do you know the percent of teens who are not sexually active versus those who are sexually active? Do you know the percentages of teens who are not using condoms versus those who are using condoms? And do you know the percentage of teens who are not using birth control versus those using birth control other than condoms? All right. So in the red, 53% of teens have never had sex. 66% of teens are not sexually active. 60% of teens are using condoms. And 77% of teens are not using any other birth control other than condoms. 23% are. So those other methods might be something like using a birth control pill. How can teen sexual health be improved? Well, we can avoid sexual risk situations. We can not have unprotected sex. Communicate openly with your partner. This picture here shows a potentially risky situation, right? The stereotypical dark alley. So avoiding places like that. Making sure that if a person chooses to have intercourse, that they are using protection. Communication is key in every healthy relationship. And of course, if we are sexually active, it is important to get tested for STIs and pregnancies, and then to get treated for any STIs that a person might have. Right, we're going to move on to the typical changes in the male and female bodies during puberty. If you're following along in your notes, you can write this. I think it should be around page 2. So starting with the female, typical development of the female body. All right, so we have increased hormones starting to be produced as we move through puberty. Body odor. It's very common in upper elementary grades for teachers to just kind of make a blanket statement, just warning everybody, time for you all to start wearing deodorant, start using deodorant. Body hair starts to develop, whether that's pubic hair or underarm hair. Breast development. Larger pelvis and hips. And menstruation, or a female starting to have their period. Okay, so all of these happen because of the changes that happen to prepare for reproduction. So reproduction or having a baby may be the furthest thing from your mind, but when you go through puberty, that's what your body is preparing for. So that's why we have the change in hormones. The different hormones cause different things to happen. The breasts develop, for example, in order to be able to breastfeed a baby. The hips get wider in order for a baby to be able to move through the birth canal during birth. And then, of course, menstruation, getting your period, is essential in order for reproduction to happen. A female has to release a mature egg, and then that egg has to be fertilized in order for reproduction to happen. Moving on to the male, we also have increased hormones. Males typically start to have that voice change. The voice gets a little deeper. Body odor and body hair. Nocturnal emissions or wet dreams. Bigger muscles. And larger genitals. The penis and testicles enlarge. All right, there's also those are all physical changes for both the male and female, but there's also some emotional and social changes that happen during puberty for both males and females. Mood swings are very common. So teenagers tend to be moody. That is absolutely normal, and a lot of that is due to change in hormone levels. Teens are starting to develop an interest in sex, or as you move through puberty. Change in the parent-child relationship. So you're moving from that child towards an adult, and things are just different now. You might be expected to take on more responsibilities. You might want to be treated more like an adult. You might want some independence. You might start doing things like dating and maybe getting a job and driving, right? All of those change your parent-child relationships. And you also might be concerned with your body image as things are changing. So that picture just shows some of the moods we might be going through. Our interest in sex, change in that relationship with parents, and being concerned with body image. All right, we're going to finish up today with some basic terminology. This slide in particular shows some of the gender-related terms or definitions that we will be learning about. So I'll start on the far left. Sex is the male or female sex assigned at birth. Moving to the top center, gender role is the role and behaviors that society expects for males and females. A very stereotypical role would be that a woman might be a stay-at-home mom, and a male might be the breadwinner of the family, the one who goes out and works and supports the family. That is a very stereotypical gender role. Moving over to the right, sexual orientation is to whom a person is attracted, either male or female or both. So who a person is attracted to sexually or romantically describes your sexual orientation. And then on the bottom, gender identity is whether a person sees himself as male or female, how they identify. Okay, some more terms to cover. The term sex is a term used to denote whether an individual is male or female at the time of birth. That was on the previous slide as well. Intersex is a general term used for a variety of conditions where a person is born with biological characteristics that don't seem to fit the typical definitions of female or male. Gender, the attitudes, feelings, characteristics, and behaviors that a given culture associate with being male or female, and that are often labeled masculine or feminine. Gender roles. I mentioned this one earlier. The roles and behaviors that society expects from males and females. So again, my stereotypical, very old-fashioned gender role example would be that a female will be a stay-at-home mom and the male will be the person that supports the family financially. Gender nonconformity is when a person's behavior or appearance does not conform to the expected gender role. Gender identity is a person's internal, deeply felt sense of being male or female, or something other or in between. So a person may identify as a female or a male or something different. Transgender is a person whose gender identity differs from their assigned or presumed sex at birth. For example, a transgender male would be a person who was assigned female at birth and now identifies as a male. So they are called a transgender male. Gender expression. Each of us expresses a particular gender every day by the way we style our hair, select our clothing, or even the way we stand. Our appearance, speech, behavior, movement, and other factors signal that we feel that we feel, and wish to be understood as masculine or feminine or something other or in between. Cisgender is people whose gender identity or their inner sense of being male or female or something else is the same as their assigned sex at birth. Gender binary, a social system that constructs gender according to two discrete and opposite categories, male or female. Gender expansive is a more flexible range of gender identities or expressions than those associated with the binary gender system. And sexual orientation, a person's enduring romantic or sexual attraction to people of the other and or same gender. Common terms used to describe sexual orientation include, but are not limited to, heterosexual, lesbian, gay, and bisexual. And this is just a diagram showing the gender spectrum, the varieties of gender expression from feminine, masculine, and then androgynous and non-conforming. LGBTQ bias and effects. LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender questioning. So, I'll start at the top, we'll go clockwise. Most LGBTQ students have experienced harassment and discrimination at school. Associated problems include family rejection, homelessness, employment discrimination, homicide, and even suicide. School staff often fail to intervene when they hear these remarks at school. Hostile school environments negatively affect LGBTQ students' the students' educational outcomes and their mental health. Did you know most LGBTQ students have experienced harassment and discrimination at school? Did you know 8 in 10 have experienced verbal harassment? Nearly 2/3 experience physical harassment. Nearly 1/3 miss at least one day of school due to this feelings of being uncomfortable and discriminated, worried about harassment. Did you know LGBTQ students have lower GPAs and higher level of depression? That doesn't mean that LGBTQ students are not smart. That means they're dealing with a lot more. And did you know LGBTQ students who are victims are twice as likely to not go to college? Don't judge. Because sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression vary with each individual, it is important to be accepting of others and to celebrate diversity. And that concludes the screencast for part 1 of our notes today.